it's all about getting as much truth and facts out there as possible. Because what we've seen with this issue is just there's a lot of misinformation out there, and it's about countering that with facts, and that's what I think journalists should do. I also think it's about holding public officials accountable for what they say and do, because this is this growing issue with hate crimes. I think, based on my experience, that you can reverse the trend, but it's going to take leadership from the top. But at every level, it's the state level, it's in Congress, it's in the White House. You have to counter these threats with strong language and actions. And I think in some cases, we haven't seen enough of politicians denouncing some of these hateful acts. And I think that needs to change.
How do you react to people who say there are still news organizations, CBS News, some of the legacy news organizations that are fact-driven? They want accuracy. They want to make sure they're correct. That goes out. We still have an escalation. There are still sources for those who don't like the facts to pursue whatever information they have. That we are in a post-fact era.
Yeah, I think that the legacy news organizations, CBS specifically, if people only knew what the kind of rigorous vetting that our scripts go through, I think they'd have a totally different view of news organizations. Now, not every news organizations can afford to have all the different levels of fact checks that we have. But when I write a script, there are producers that I send the script to. There are fact checkers who look at it and send back corrections. I tell everyone who asks me, it's like being in college all over again every day, because you have so many different levels. I mentioned the producers, I mentioned fact checkers, and the lawyers, of course. And then other producers outside of that. And so there are different levels of vetting that I think most news organizations, whether they're local or network or cable, they should have the same kind of fact-checking in-house so that, yeah, the people are getting the truth, they're getting the facts. Now, the other problem is you have all these different platforms that don't have the same journalism ethics that we have. And I think that's part of the problem. And you have a certain segment of the population that's where they get their news from. Or they get their news from social media. I don't personally think that's where you should get your news from. Because it's hard for me sometimes to figure out what's fact and fiction on some of these social media feeds. So you really have to be careful, and I think we as journalists have a responsibility to do as thorough a job as possible, getting the people the news that they need.
Do you also have a responsibility as a journalist? Everything you say is obviously valid. Journalists used to always say, the story is not us. The story is not how difficult, what we went through to get this story. The story is whatever we're covering. Journalists also do a very bad job, I believe, of explaining the processes you just described. We're fact-driven. We have producers, executive producers, legal teams that look at that. But journalists seldom talk about that. The New York Times only recently started publishing why and when they use anonymous sources. Good for the public to know that. But traditionally, journalists don't talk about their methodology. Is that problematic?
You know, I think people have so much information, okay, some of it misinformation at their fingertips. But I think in this day and age, when transparency is important, I think, and this is my personal feeling, I think it's important to be as transparent as possible with your viewers. And, you know, even if they don't watch CBS, I proudly tell them, you know, how many different levels of vetting my scripts have to go through. Because as a reporter, you're working on deadline, and it's easy to get something wrong. You're trying to type out a script in 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 5 minutes. And so it's easy to make a mistake. And so it's, in my view, it's great to have someone looking over your shoulder and say, let's change this. That's not right. Let's get that out of there. And that's essentially the process that we have. And it protects me from becoming the story, frankly, by putting something out there that's not accurate. And so it is worth having all of those levels of checks and balances in a newsroom so that you not only save yourself from getting sued, but you're also putting out the best possible product that you can do on that particular day at that particular time under deadline pressure.
Looking to the future, what can journalists do a better job of, specifically in the arena of reporting on extremism?
Do we do enough covering hate crimes? No, we can always do better. But there are a lot of topics that we could always do better. But this is, in my opinion, one of those pressing issues that's not getting better, it's getting worse. And we have to demonstrate through our reporting some of the steps that are being taken in communities like Pittsburgh and other communities across the country to eradicate hate. You know, someone told me here today, you know, we may not ever eradicate hate, but we can also lessen the potential for hate. And I agree with that. I think through vigorous reporting, through unearthing some of these new hate groups that are popping up all over the country, by exposing what's happening, and then holding law enforcement and public officials accountable in terms of talking about the steps that they are taking to make our communities, every community, safer. I think it makes a difference.